The Lumina chamber was a hollowed-out moon, its interior polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the swirling nebulae projected onto its vaulted ceiling. Here, the conclave of whispering stars convened, a gathering of beings whose forms were as varied as the worlds they represented. Light from gaseous stellar nurseries painted their faces in hues of violet and gold, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper of cosmic dread. At the center of this cavernous space, a dais of living crystal pulsed with a soft, internal light, upon which sat the Arbiter, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell, its thoughts rippling through the chamber as waves of palpable pressure. The air, a carefully synthesized mix of noble gases and trace elements to accommodate all present, was thick with an unspoken fear, a silence so profound it felt heavier than any sound. They had gathered to discuss a phantom, a species that had drifted into their awareness from the unexplored dark between galactic arms, a race known only as humanity. The first to break the silence was a Cathar delegate, his massive insected form shifting restlessly on its multi-jointed legs, his chitinous plates scraping against the stone floor with a sound like grinding worlds. His voice, a series of resonant clicks and deep chitters translated by the chamber's ambient field, was laced with a frustration that bordered on contempt. They are an anomaly, a statistical impossibility. Their expansion is not like the slow, methodical creep of a nascent starfaring race. It is a series of erratic, unpredictable leaps. They appear in systems deemed uninhabitable, their vessels of a design that defies our understanding of physics. They are chaotic. He gestured with a scythed forelimb toward the central holographic display, where the image of a human ship hung suspended in shimmering light. It was a crude thing by conclave standards, an ugly asymmetrical vessel scarred with the burns of atmospheric entries and the pockmarks of micrometeoroid impacts. It looked less like a starship and more like a relic, a piece of debris given motive force. This is their presence. These derelicts, they litter the border sectors, silent and dark. They do not respond to hails, they simply exist, a fleet of ghosts. From across the chamber, the ethereal form of a Zalosian emissary shimmered. It was a being of woven light and thought, its voice a gentle chorus of harmonious chimes. Chaos is a perception, delegate, not a state of being. We have observed them for cycles. They build, they explore, they communicate amongst themselves with a language of bewildering complexity. Their art, what little we have managed to intercept, speaks of profound sorrow and unrestrained joy. They are not ghosts. They are loud in their silence. The Zalosians' melodic tones were a counterpoint to the Cathar's harshness, but the underlying concern was the same. The unknown was a poison, and humanity was a well of it, deep and dark. The fear in the chamber was not of conquest, not in the traditional sense. The conclave had weathered empires that rose and fell like tides. The fear was of something more fundamental, a force that did not adhere to the ancient, established rules of cosmic diplomacy and power. The Arbiter's light pulsed, and a thought, clear and sharp as cut glass, entered every mind present. The Vorlag have made contact. A collective tremor passed through the assembly. The Vorlag were a predatory race, territorial and brutally efficient. They saw the galaxy not as a tapestry of cultures, but as a collection of resources to be consumed. They were a known quantity, a predictable evil that the conclave kept contained through a delicate balance of overwhelming force and carefully managed borders. That they would engage the humans was an eventuality that had been debated for years, a collision of the known and the unknown that every member of the conclave had secretly dreaded. The Arbiter continued, its thought voice devoid of emotion. They dispatched a subjugation fleet to the system designated by the humans as Elysium. They encountered a single human vessel, the one you see before you. The image of the battered human ship magnified, its metallic hull seeming to absorb the light of the chamber. It was named, according to the fragmented data packets they had intercepted, the Odyssey. A name that meant nothing to the assembled aliens, but the weight of the moment gave it a sudden, terrible significance. The Cathar delegate clicked in agitation. A single vessel against a Vorlag subjugation fleet. It is a sacrifice, then, a gesture of defiance before their inevitable absorption. Foolish. It will only provoke the Vorlag into a wider, more aggressive campaign. He saw the galaxy in terms of numbers, of fleet strength and logistical capacity. A single ship, especially one that looked so primitive, was a rounding error, a footnote in the calculus of war. The Arbiter's light shifted and the holographic display changed. The Odyssey was no longer alone. Surrounding it, appearing as if from nowhere, was the Vorlag fleet. The display rendered them in stark, brutalist red. There were ships of all classes, from sleek, needle-like scouts to colossal dreadnoughts whose very presence seemed to warp the space around them. They formed a perfect sphere of containment around the lone human vessel, a net of overwhelming power closing in. The chamber was silent, the delegates watching what they believed to be the final moments of this strange, isolated human outpost. The Zalosian emissary's light flickered with something akin to sadness. To die so far from their home, unseen by their own kind, there is a tragedy in it that resonates. "Observe," the Arbiter commanded. The delegates leaned forward, their varied sensory organs focused intently on the unfolding scene. The Vorlag broadcast their ultimatum on all frequencies, a demand for unconditional surrender, a declaration of their dominion. It was a roar of power, a statement of indisputable fact. The human ship remained silent. It did not power its weapons. It did not raise its shields. Its energy signature remained flat, almost dormant. It simply floated in the void, a mote of dust in the face of a storm. The Vorlag ships began to move, their weapon ports glowing with nascent energy, the space around them beginning to hum with the promise of annihilation. The Cathar delegate settled back, a grim satisfaction in his posture. The universe was unfolding as it should. Order, even brutal order, was asserting itself over chaos. Then something happened that defied all logic, all known principles of stellar combat. The Odyssey did not fire a weapon. It did not launch a counterattack. Instead, the space around the Vorlag fleet began to change. It was not a technology the Conclave had ever witnessed. It was not a gravity well, nor a temporal distortion. It was something more fundamental. The very fabric of spacetime seemed to ripple, to fold in on itself. The Vorlag dreadnoughts, ships the size of small moons, suddenly found themselves compressed, their massive hulls groaning under impossible pressures. The smaller vessels were simply erased, their energy signatures vanishing from the display as if they had never existed. There was no light, no explosion, no grand spectacle of destruction. There was only a quiet, terrifying unmaking. The Vorlag fleet, an armada that had terrorized a dozen star systems, ceased to exist in the space of a few heartbeats. The commanders on their bridge would have had no time to understand, no moment to feel fear. One instant they were the masters of the void, confident in their overwhelming power. The next, they were gone, their ships and their crews reduced to a fleeting quantum shimmer. The holographic display showed only the Odyssey, floating placidly in the now empty space, its energy signature as calm and unremarkable as before. The void where the Vorlag had been was pristine, empty, as if the fleet had been a dream, a collective hallucination that had finally dissipated. The Lumina chamber was gripped by a silence that was no longer just heavy, but suffocating. The Cathar delegate was frozen, his mandibles parted in a silent scream of disbelief. The Zalosian's light form contracted, its harmonies discordant and sharp. Every being in that chamber, from the silicon-based life forms of the Cygnus Rift to the gas giant dwellers of the Corward Reach, felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a primal, existential dread, the kind that a creature feels when it realizes that the predator it has been observing from what it thought was a safe distance is, in fact, something else entirely. Something far, far older and more powerful than it could have ever conceived. The Arbiter's thought voice cut through the stunned silence, calm and uninflected, yet carrying the weight of a new and terrible reality. The human vessel has sent a message. It is addressed to the Conclave. The image of the Odyssey vanished, replaced by a string of elegant, flowing symbols, a language of pure mathematics that was instantly comprehensible to all present. It was not a threat. It was not a boast. It was not a declaration of war. It was an apology. The message was simple, translated by the chamber's field into the core concepts of each species' language. We apologize for the disruption. The Vorlag entity was operating outside the accepted parameters of galactic conduct. Its continued existence posed a threat to nascent life in this sector. We have removed the threat. We regret any collateral distress this action may have caused. The Elysium system is now under our protection. Further incursions will be met with a similar response. We are open to establishing a dialogue. The chamber erupted, not in sound but in a chaotic storm of thought and emotion. Apology, disruption, they had just witnessed the casual annihilate. Ion of one of the galaxy's most feared military forces, and the perpetrators were apologizing for the noise. The Cathar delegate found his voice, a series of enraged, terrified clicks. This is a trick, a display of power meant to cow us. They speak of galactic conduct as if they are its arbiters. Who are these creatures? What gives them the right to pass judgment on another species? The Zalosian emissary, however, saw something different. Its light pulsed with a new, dawning understanding. They did not destroy the Vorlag out of malice or for conquest, it chimed, its voice trembling with awe. They did it because the Vorlag were a danger to others, to life that could not defend itself. It was not an act of war. It was an act of guardianship. The implications of that thought were staggering. The Conclave had always operated on the principle of non-interference, of allowing the brutal dance of evolution and extinction to play out, only stepping in when the stability of the entire galactic arm was threatened. These humans, these silent, unpredictable newcomers, had appointed themselves the protectors of life itself. The Arbiter's light brightened, forcing the cacophony of thought to subside. They have sent something else. A gift, a gesture of goodwill. The mathematical symbols shifted, resolving into a complex, multi-layered data stream. It was a complete, detailed schematic of the weapon the Odyssey had used. It was not a weapon. It was a tool, a device for manipulating the fundamental constants of a localized area of spacetime. The principles behind it were so advanced, so elegant, that the finest minds of the Conclave would need centuries to fully comprehend them, and the humans were simply giving it to them. The Cathar delegate recoiled as if struck. They give away their greatest advantage. This is madness. It is a trap. They want us to try and replicate it, to fail, to reveal our own technological limitations and intentions. Or, the Zalosian countered softly, its form glowing with a newfound and terrifying respect. They are so far beyond us that they do not consider it an advantage. It is simply a tool. And they are showing us how it works because they want us to understand. They are not conquerors, they are teachers. The silence that followed was different. The fear was still there, but it was now mingled with a profound and unsettling sense of awe. The Conclave of Whispering Stars had spent millennia mapping the galaxy, charting the rise and fall of civilizations, defining the very laws of interstellar politics. And in a single, silent moment, a lone, battered ship crewed by a species they had dismissed as chaotic primitives had redrawn that map, had rewritten those laws. Humanity was no longer an anomaly. They were the new context, the framework against which all other life in the galaxy would now be measured. And the Conclave, for the first time in its long and storied history, felt truly, utterly small. The universe had just become infinitely larger and infinitely more frightening. The debate was no longer about what to do about the humans. The debate was about how to survive in a galaxy that contained them. Weeks turned into months. The Conclave remained in session, a state of affairs unheard of in its history. The data stream from the Odyssey was a wound in their collective psyche, a puzzle box that grew more complex the more they studied it. The technology it described was not just advanced, it was philosophically different. Their own science was one of force, of pushing against the universe with engines and weapons, of bending it to their will. Human technology, as represented in these schematics, was one of harmony, of listening to the universe's fundamental song and humming along with it, of gently requesting that reality reshape itself. To manipulate spacetime was not to break its laws, but to understand them so completely that they became suggestions rather than edicts. The Cathar and their allied factions argued for a military response. They saw this gift as the ultimate insult, a display of technological superiority so vast it was indistinguishable from a threat. "We must arm ourselves," the Cathar delegate insisted, his clicks sharp and urgent. "We must build our own reality-shaping devices. We must show them that we are not children to be lectured." But the engineers and physicists of the Conclave, after weeks of frantic, sleepless analysis, returned a chilling verdict. They could not replicate it, not in 1,000 years. They lacked the foundational knowledge, the understanding of quantum mechanics and cosmology that was clearly second nature to the humans. To even attempt it with their current technology would be like a caveman trying to build a fusion reactor with flint and tinder. The result would not be a weapon, but a cataclysm of their own making. The Zalosian faction, meanwhile, advocated for diplomacy. "They have offered dialogue," the emissary chimed it. As light a steady, calming pulse in the tense chamber. "They have demonstrated a capacity for both immense power and immense restraint. They have judged and executed a galactic threat according to a moral calculus we are only beginning to comprehend. To respond with aggression would not only be suicidal, it would be unenlightened. We must talk to them. We must learn." This was the crux of the fear that now held the Conclave in its grip. The possibility that humanity was not just more powerful, but better, wiser, more evolved in a way that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with character. It was a possibility that threatened to unravel the identity of every species in that chamber, to render their own long histories, their triumphs and their philosophies, meaningless. Finally, after protracted and bitter debate, the arbiter rendered its judgment. We will accept their offer. We will open a dialogue, but we will do so with caution. We will send a delegation. The question then became who to send. No one volunteered. To meet these beings face-to-face was a terrifying prospect. They had seen what a single, seemingly insignificant human ship could do. What would a dedicated diplomatic vessel be like? What would the humans themselves be like? Beings who could unmake an armada with a thought, what would they look like? How would they speak? The conclave, for all its power and wisdom, was paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. It was then that a new message arrived from the Odyssey. It had not moved from its position, a silent sentinel in the Elysium system. The message was, like the first, a model of calm efficiency. "We understand your hesitation. We will come to you." The statement sent a fresh wave of panic through the chamber. Here, they were coming here, to their most sacred place, their center of government. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also, in a strange way, a relief. The decision had been taken out of their hands. The meeting would happen on their ground, but on human terms. The preparations were frantic. Security fleets, the pride of the conclave navy, were positioned in carefully concealed orbits around the hollowed-out moon. The Lumina chamber itself was reinforced with every defensive technology they possessed. Sensors were recalibrated to detect every conceivable form of energy and matter. They prepared for a warship of unimaginable power, a vessel that would dwarf their own capital ships, bristling with weapons that could peel reality apart like fruit. They prepared for an invasion. What arrived was the Odyssey, the same battered, ugly, asymmetrical ship that had haunted their holographic displays for months. It dropped out of hyperspace with a gentle ripple, a movement as soft as a sigh. It did not power shields. It did not deploy weapons. It simply drifted towards the designated docking ring, its ancient hull scarred with the silent stories of 1,000 journeys. Its energy signature was as quiet as a sleeping animal. The contrast between its humble appearance and the memory of what it had done to the Vorlag was a form of psychological warfare more effective than any weapon. The conclave watched from the Lumina chamber's main viewscreen as the Odyssey docked. There was a pause, a long, drawn-out silence that stretched for an eternity. Then the airlock hissed open. The delegates held their collective breath. What manner of being would emerge? A towering god of energy? A creature of nightmarish biological perfection? A warrior clad in impenetrable armor? A single figure emerged. It was bipedal, slender, and surprisingly small. It wore a simple, form-fitting dark blue uniform unadorned with any rank or insignia. Its face was soft, unarmored, expressive. Its eyes, two dark pools of calm intelligence, scanned the docking bay with a gentle curiosity. The being was a human. It carried no weapon. It was flanked by no guards. It was utterly, terrifyingly vulnerable, and it was smiling. A faint, serene expression that spoke not of arrogance, but of a quiet, unshakable confidence. The human envoy walked down the ramp and stood before the reception committee, a collection of the conclave's most imposing and heavily armed soldiers. They towered over the human, their armor gleaming, their weapons held at the ready. The human simply inclined its head in a gesture of greeting. A universal translator, a device gifted in the second data stream, spoke from a small device on the human's wrist. The voice was calm, melodic, and resonant. "I am Ambassador Sarah Jensen. On behalf of the Terran Confederacy, I thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope we can begin a productive and peaceful relationship." The sheer, unadulterated normalcy of it was the most shocking thing the conclave had ever witnessed. They had prepared for a god or a monster, and they had received a diplomat. The dissonance was so profound that for a long moment, no one knew how to react. The commander of the Hun, Orgard, a towering Cathar warrior bred for battle, found himself staring at the small, soft creature before him, and for the first time in his life he felt a flicker of something he could not name. It was not fear. It was wonder. Ambassador Jensen was escorted to the Lumina chamber. She walked through the grand halls, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous spaces, her calm gaze taking in the millennia of history and power encoded in the architecture. She did not seem intimidated. She did not seem impressed. She seemed interested in the way a scholar might be interested in a fascinating but ancient text. When she entered the chamber itself, a soft gasp went through the assembled delegates. She was so fragile, so organic. A being of soft tissue and flowing blood in a room of crystal, chitin, and contained energy. She walked to the center of the chamber and stood before the arbiter's dais, her small form bathed in its pulsating light. She looked up at the swirling nebulae on the ceiling, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice carrying in the immense space. "You have a remarkable sense of aesthetics." The compliment was so unexpected, so disarmingly genuine, that it shattered the last vestiges of their prepared speeches and diplomatic postures. The Arbiter's thought voice filled the chamber, cold and direct. You wield a power that can erase fleets from existence. You trespass in our space. You execute judgment upon other sovereign species. Explain yourselves. Sarah Jensen's smile faded, replaced by an expression of deep, profound seriousness. She met the Arbiter's non-gaze without flinching. We do not see it as power, she began, her voice steady and clear. We see it as a responsibility. The technology you witnessed is not a weapon. It is a consequence of our understanding of the universe, an understanding that was born from great suffering. She paused, and a deep sadness seemed to emanate from her, a sorrow so old and vast it seemed to cool the air in the chamber. My species has a difficult history. We have fought wars that have scarred our planet and our souls. We have come close to extinguishing ourselves more times than I can count. We have learned, through fire and blood, the terrible price of unchecked aggression, of ideology wielded as a weapon, of the belief that might makes right. She gestured to the empty space where the image of the Odyssey had once hung. That ship, the Odyssey, is not a warship. It is a monument. It is one of our oldest surviving vessels from a time we call the Age of Reconciliation, when we finally turned away from our self-destructive path and dedicated ourselves to a new philosophy, a philosophy of guardianship. The Cathar delegate could not contain himself. Guardianship? You call the annihilation of a fleet guardianship? He clicked, his voice dripping with scorn. Jensen turned her calm gaze upon him. There was no anger in her eyes, only a weary patience. The Vorlag were a predatory species that functioned on a singular imperative: consume and expand. They did not value life. They did not recognize the concept of coexistence. They were, in the most fundamental sense, a cancer. A force of entropy that, if left unchecked, would have sterilized this entire sector of the galaxy, extinguishing countless nascent civilizations before they ever had the chance to look up at the stars and wonder. We did not destroy them. We excised them. It was a surgical procedure. It was done without malice, without hatred, and with profound regret. We do not celebrate their passing. We mourn the necessity of it. The concept was alien to them. Regret for victory, mourning an enemy. The Zalosian emissary's light pulsed with understanding. You act not for yourselves, but for the principle of life itself, it chimed. Precisely, Jensen affirmed. We have explored the darkness between the stars for a very long time. We have seen the ruins of 1,000 civilizations that destroyed themselves. We have found the silent graves of species wiped out by cosmic accidents or predatory empires. The universe is vast and beautiful, but it is also profoundly empty and unforgiving. We believe that consciousness, the universe experiencing itself, is the most precious and rare phenomenon in existence. And we have taken it upon ourselves to protect it, wherever we find it. This was the great reveal. It was not a technology. It was not a weapon. It was a philosophy, a purpose. The humans were not conquerors. They were not even explorers in the traditional sense. They were gardeners in the vast, dark forest of the cosmos, tending to the fragile saplings of life and ruthlessly pruning the branches that threatened to choke out the others. The schematics we sent you, Jensen continued, turning back to the Arbiter, were not a threat. They were an invitation to understand our perspective. We want you to see the universe as we see it, not as a Rittery to be claimed, but as a garden to be nurtured. We do not desire to rule you. We desire to work with you. The galaxy is facing challenges far greater than the squabbles of empires. The Arbiter pulsed with a question that cut to the heart of their deepest fear. And if we refuse? If we see your guardianship as a tyranny of its own? Sarah Jensen's expression softened. Then we will leave you in peace, she said simply. We will mark your territory as a sovereign zone and respect your borders. We will not force our philosophy upon you, but we will also not allow you to stand by while preventable tragedies unfold. If a threat emerges that you are unwilling or unable to contain, we will act. We would prefer to act as your allies, but we will act as guardians regardless. The continued existence of life is not negotiable. The finality of her statement hung in the air, absolute and unshakable. It was not a threat, but a statement of fact, as immutable as gravity. The humans had presented the conclave with a choice, but it was not the choice they had expected. It was not a choice between submission and war. It was a choice between partnership and irrelevance. They could join the humans in their grand, cosmic purpose, or they could continue to play their games of power and influence in their own small corner of the galaxy, knowing that the real adults were in the room now, and they would handle the truly important matters. The Cathar delegate was apoplectic, but his rage was that of a child who has just been told that his games are over. The other delegates were silent, their minds reeling. They were being offered a role in a story far grander than their own, a chance to be part of something that mattered on a cosmic scale. But it meant accepting that they were not the pinnacle of galactic civilization, that their philosophies were incomplete, their power insignificant next to the quiet, determined purpose of these soft-spoken, fragile-looking beings. The Arbiter remained silent for a long time, its light pulsating slowly, thoughtfully. It was communing with the collective consciousness of its own ancient species, weighing millennia of tradition against the staggering implications of this single meeting. The human ambassador, Sarah Jensen, stood patiently, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture relaxed but resolute. She had delivered her message. She had planted the seed. Now she simply waited to see if it would grow in this alien soil. The fate of the galaxy, the future of countless worlds, hung in that silence, in the space between the thoughts of an ancient energy being and the quiet breathing of a single, unassuming human. The Arbiter's light finally coalesced into a single, decisive pulse. Its thought voice resonated through the chamber, no longer cold, but tinged with a new, uncertain emotion. "Oh, we accept. We will establish a liaison. We will learn." A collective sigh of relief and trepidation swept through the delegates. A new age had begun. The age of the conclave was over. The age of the gardeners had dawned. As the formal agreements were being drafted, a process that would take weeks of careful, respectful negotiation, Ambassador Jensen was given quarters within the Lumina Chamber's residential spires. She spent her time not in meetings, but in the conclave's vast archives, a repository of knowledge stretching back millions of years. She devoured their history, their art, their philosophy, showing a genuine and profound respect for their cultures that further disarmed even the most skeptical delegates. She walked among them, answered their questions, and shared stories of her own people. She spoke of Earth, of its oceans and mountains, of its music and its poetry. She described humanity's fall and its rebirth, the long, painful journey that had led them to this moment. During one such conversation with the Zalosian emissary, they stood on an observation deck overlooking a stellar nursery, the birthplace of new suns and worlds. "Your philosophy of guardianship is noble," the Zalosian chimed, its light form swirling in thoughtful patterns. "But it is a heavy burden, to carry the weight of so many lives to make such terrible choices. How do you bear it?" Sarah Jensen looked out at the clouds of incandescent gas, her reflection a faint ghost against the stellar fire. "We bear it because we must," she said softly. "We bear it so that one day the children of those nascent worlds can look up at this same sky and not have to. We bear it by remembering our own past, the darkness we clawed our way out of. Every time we are forced to act, as we did with the Vorlag, we are reminded of what we once were. And it strengthens our resolve to ensure that no one else has to suffer as we did." Her gaze was distant, filled with a sorrow that was as vast as the nebula before them. "The Odyssey, it's more than a monument, it's a promise we made to ourselves and to the universe, never again." E-Alliance was formalized. A new era of cooperation began. Conclave scientists worked alongside human engineers, humbled and amazed by the depth of their knowledge. Human philosophers and artists exchanged ideas with their conclave counterparts, finding common ground in the universal search for meaning and beauty. The galaxy, once a place of competing interests and cold equations of power, began to feel like a community. The fear of humanity was replaced by a deep and abiding respect, and in its place, a new shared sense of purpose grew. It was during a joint scientific expedition to a previously unexplored region of the galactic core that the twist came. The mission was aboard the Odyssey, now a symbol of the new alliance, crewed by both humans and members of various conclave species. They were charting gravitational anomalies, phenomena that the conclave had long catalogued but never understood. With human technology, they were finally able to see what was causing them. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was a network. A vast, galaxy-spanning web of artificial filaments, thinner than a human hair but incredibly dense, woven through the fabric of spacetime itself. And at the center of the galaxy, at the heart of the supermassive black hole that all stars orbited, the network converged. Their sensors, boosted by human science, picked up a signal traveling along this network. It was incredibly faint, weakened by an unimaginable journey through time and space. It was not a message in any language they could comprehend. It was more fundamental than that. It was a distress call, a warning. Encoded in the very structure of the signal's modulation was a set of mathematical proofs and physical constants that described a force, an entity that was consuming galaxies. Not with the crude violence of the Vorlag, but with a terrifying, inexorable efficiency, like a blight spreading through a forest. The signal was a remnant, a ghost, an echo of a civilization that had faced this threat and lost, their final act a desperate attempt to warn whoever might come after them. The date of the signal's origin was impossible to calculate precisely, but it was old. Older than the Conclave, older than humanity, older perhaps than the galaxy itself. The entity it warned of was not from their reality. It was a leak from a higher dimensional plane, a cosmic predator that saw entire universes as feeding grounds. The Vorlag, the petty wars of empires, the rise and fall of civilizations, all of it was just the rustling of leaves in a forest, unaware of the approaching fire. On the bridge of the Odyssey, surrounded by her new allies, Ambassador Jensen stared at the data pouring in. The calm, serene confidence that had so unnerved the Conclave was gone, replaced by an expression of grim, cold resolve that was somehow even more terrifying. The Cathar commander of the joint mission, standing beside her, felt a tremor of his old fear return, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was not the fear of the unknown human, but the fear of the known universe, a universe that had suddenly become a much darker and more dangerous place. He looked at the small, fragile-looking woman beside him, and he finally understood. He understood the sorrow in her eyes, the weight of her species' history. Humanity had not just prepared itself for the petty squabbles of the galaxy. They had been preparing for this. Their entire philosophy, their technology, their purpose, it was all forged in the crucible of their own near-self-destruction, a trial by fire that had inadvertently tempered them into the only thing that could stand against the coming night. They were not just gardeners. They were the galaxy's antibodies, its last, best hope against an infection that consumed reality itself. "What do we do?" the Cathar commander asked, his voice a low, humbled rumble. Sarah Jensen did not take her eyes off the star chart, where a faint, almost imperceptible shadow was beginning to encroach on the edge of their galaxy, a shadow that only their combined technology could now see. "We do what we were born to do," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with the certainty of a striking bell. "We stand the watch, we hold the line, and we are not alone anymore." The Odyssey, the ship that had been written off, the relic that had become a monument, turned its bow towards the encroaching darkness. It was no longer just a human ship. It was the first vessel of a new, united galactic fleet, a single point of light and defiance against the overwhelming dark. The story of humanity was not over. It had just begun, and the universe would hold its breath to see what came next.